Hello, welcome to the Catholic Arena podcast. My name is Jerome. Tonight I'm joined again, as always, by Augustine. Hello, Augustine, how's it going?
Hello, Jerome. Hello, everyone listening.
Tonight we're going to do a review of The Passion of the Christ, the film by Mel Gibson that came out several years ago. We planned to come up with this around Easter, but things kind of got ahead of us, but we're setting aside the time to do it now. And I believe that Mel Gibson is actually working on a sequel to The Passion called Resurrection, which is coming out in the next few years. I'm not quite sure when. But The Passion, it was a seminal film. Several other films have dealt with this, with Jesus' time on earth. I suppose the most famous one would have been Jesus of Nazareth. That was quite a good, but that kind of focused on his entire life. This one focused on just a few days in Jesus' life, from Holy Thursday until Easter Sunday, and of course, yes, Easter Sunday. And we believe it was quite a very well made film, and we're just going to talk about it for a few minutes tonight.
Yeah, I suppose the thing to remember about it is, I mean, it's hard to believe it's actually almost 20 years old now. It was 2004 when it came out, and I suppose there's a generation of Catholics who might be in their early 20s, and it's very hard for them to understand the controversy that surrounded this film. So maybe this will be of some assistance to them in understanding that. As you said, there were other films based on the life of Christ that came out before, but what made this one so unique was the detail that it had in terms of, instead of Christ speaking, there's I think, I'm not sure which film it was, whether it was was it King of Kings or but whichever it was, anyway, the one with John Wayne at the end, and John Wayne's a Roman soldier, and he says, truly he was the Son of God, and a lot of the original films about Christ were very Hollywood, very Americanized, and although they had some value, definitely, they didn't really capture the gruesomeness of Christ's death. And apart from that, the film wasn't just centered on the gruesomeness, even though that's kind of what made it so controversial. The other things about it that were really significant were that Christ spoke Aramaic in the film, and there were also people obviously speaking Hebrew. The other thing was that there were so many things surrounding it where people on the set were so committed to the roles and committed to making it as realistic as possible. So it was definitely a landmark film, and I think that any of the films that have come before just pale in comparison. And like the most recent one I think before that was The Last Temptation of Christ, which was basically Martin Scorsese essentially making almost a mockery of Christ and kind of hiding behind art as an excuse, So, but the thing about that film was a lot of people said that there was an artistic merit to it, and how Willem Dafoe would play Christ. It was a bit different from the ones before, but obviously the fact that there's so many problematic elements to it kind of took away from that. So Mel Gibson really put his neck out making this film, and it's still very powerful today.
Yeah, so, and obviously it's quite well known Mel Gibson is a devout Catholic, and it shows through the making of this film. You could tell that this was that he wanted to make this as a testament to his faith, and that his belief, he felt this story needed to be told in this way, because like you said, a lot of different other versions have been done before. There has never been the amount of, well, I suppose maybe modern technology has enabled this, but no other film has depicted the graphic excruciating pain which Jesus has suffered. Now, if you kind of, as Catholics who have heard the Stations of the Cross, they actually get quite gruesome, because of course the Stations of the Cross, they're every station is narrated to a set formula. It's a set script basically every time. And one of the scourging at the pillar, or maybe it's after that, it references the fact that when his clothes were torn off him, parts of his skin came off. And the severeness which he was tortured in the film is it's based on the biblical accounts, and as well as the stations as well. One of the things, the first thing about the movie which struck me, and it kind of still, it's kind of like, I don't like to say a wow moment, but it kind of is. The opening scene, it's just a quote from the Old Testament. They have pierced my hands and feet, they have numbered all my bones. Now, I believe that's a prophecy from King David in Psalms, and I believe that's condensed. In Psalms, it's doesn't exactly run like that. It's more of a condensed version of a longer script. But it's it is shocking when it's like, wow, and it's clear it's from the Old Testament, which is several hundred years before this happened. And you can tell that Mel was trying to, show non-Christians as well. I mean, Christianity is quite deep, and it is linked to the Old Testament. And there are several passages in the Old Testament which have come to pass in later times. And when because I had forgotten about that, and when I saw that, I thought it was quite amazing. And then, sort of like, before I forget it, jumping ahead, the time where Jesus was scourged by the Roman soldiers, and to see the look of joy on those Roman soldiers' faces, it was very good acting and casting, because they were just brutes, really brutish men. At that time, Roman soldiers would have seen hell themselves. A lot of their life was basically of zero value back then. So you would have men who just did the job and got their pay, but you would also have men who enjoyed killing and torturing people. And that was the really troubling thing for me in that scene, because of course, I mean, it's not written what the characters of the soldiers were like, but it was just as likely to be completely vicious, sadistic brutes as it was to be just soldiers just lightly lashing Jesus, like you see in some depictions of the Passion. Like some depictions of the Passion, it's like Jesus has no marks at all, which doesn't really make sense. I mean, he was literally flayed. His all of his skin was flayed off him, basically.
That's true. Like, that's the graphicness of it is something that I don't know if anybody ever had really thought about that before this film. I know it'd been depicted in different, famous painters that painted it, but just in that methodical, as you said, that methodical evil of really inflicting pain that had never really been represented on screen like that to so many people.
Yeah. And then, kind of jumping back, Pontius Pilate was the governor of Rome. No, sorry, the governor of Judea, I think it was called at the time, the province that he was in charge of. And his depiction in the film it's kind of based on the Old Testament accounts of the Passion. I suppose in the New Testament, he's portrayed as a man who's might charitably be described as someone who is trying to do the best in the worst possible situation, or maybe a less charitable interpretation might have been, well, he was a moral coward who didn't stand up for his beliefs, because
he was personally opposed to killing Christ, but not politically opposed. To use popular phrasing today.
Yeah, and he was juggling a few different things, and there was one of his lines in the movie was, Caesar told me if there's another rebellion in this place, it'll be my head, or I'll be crucified, or the next, or something. So he was literally looking out for his own life. And I suppose when he said take him to be scourged, he was trying to see, okay, let's torture this guy really badly, but at least he'll be alive, and that might pacify the crowd. And it didn't. And one thing, I'm not sure if this take was ever mentioned before, but sometimes people say, well, that film is anti-Semitic because it shows the Jews as bad. But like, one of the modern compulsions around, say, like hate speech, for example. And of course, hate speech is it can go a lot of different places. But there's this big concern about like incitement to hatred or incitement to hate speech. And okay, if you go down that route, no one's really blaming the Jews in that movie. One interpretation could be they were incited to hate Jesus by a particular group within them, a certain privileged group, like the Pharisees. So you could say, well, no one's blaming the Jews. They were just victims of being incited to hatred. I don't think Mel Gibson is particularly has any anti-Semitic leanings or anything. But the fact was, Pontius Pilate had Jesus condemned to death because he was afraid that if he didn't, that the people who were baying for Jesus' blood would have rebelled.
Yeah, and it's funny because you forget that the whole controversy over this film, there were two things that were controversial, right? The first was that, of all people, Hollywood decided to accuse Mel Gibson of being some sort of sadist who was taking pleasure in violence, which is kind of what Hollywood is, And the second one, of course, was the accusations of anti-Semitism. And both of them, when you think about it, you have to look at some of the people who were making these accusations. One of them was Christopher Hitchens. Now, Christopher Hitchens at the time, I assume he had written The God Delusion, maybe. Not The God Delusion, that was Richard Dawkins, right? Am I getting those mixed up? That was Hitchens, right?
Or God Is Not Great. I forget who.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah.
God Is Not Great was Hitchens, yeah. So the two of them were out around the same time. And of course, Richard Dawkins was on RTE this week saying some stuff about people with Down syndrome, which is, again, these are the type of people who were criticizing the film. But Hitchens at the time, right? So like Hitchens, for all the claims to originality and like independent thought that he'd have, all he did at the time was just mirror all the really vacuous accusations that were being made against Gibson. Like, firstly, there was an interview he did where he was talking about the film, and the first thing he did was he said that Gibson was part of a wacko schismatic group, obviously referring to the SSPX. Now, I think Gibson's, or he's talking about Gibson's father, I think it was, and which again was just a nothing comment because, like, his father had nothing to do with the film. And then he started talking about the fact that, Gibson's father, something to do with him and the Holocaust and SSPX. Now, throwing them all into one because he was saying that, something about Gibson's father's views on it. And then, of course, he then went on to talk about in the same interview about Anne Catherine Emmerich, who was one of the inspirations for it. And he picked up on one comment she made about Jews at one point in her life. But at this point, she was beatified in that same year in 2004 by Pope John Paul II. So, like, he was really just trying to throw as much mud as he could at it to try and make it stick. But the interesting thing was then he actually called it, right? This is the three words he used to describe the film. He said it was boring, which nobody thinks it's boring. He said it was lurid and sadistic. Now, this was a man who a year earlier was a very important public voice in advocating for the Iraq War. And this was a war where 82% of the Christians in Iraq were wiped out because of a lie, because of a brutal lie that was created. And he was a part of that. The prisoners at the time, now I don't know when the Abu Ghraib scandal broke of the prisoners being tortured with the dogs and everything. But as far as I remember, that was around, like, that would have been early enough in the war. And he, this is what he advocated for. This was the real sadistic and lurid thing. And so when he was advocating for all of this, he was calling Mel Gibson sadistic because of a guy dressing up and pretended to be whipped, And the other stuff was, some of the other massacres from that war. There was the Hadid massacre where 24 people, including a 1-year-old child, were brutally shot dead. And he had, openly voted for George W. Bush for his second term in 2004, later on that year. And so it's outrageous to think that he would actually say that. And then he also referred to the film as being fascistic in its intentions. And again, we know that when he says fascistic, he means that he doesn't mean it necessarily in a historical sense. He means it as a pejorative, that like someone is abusing power to inflict pain on other people, which is exactly, if you look at what he supported in Iraq, that's the very definition of what he means by fascistic. And there was no room for artistic interpretation in how he described the film and others. He starts saying, Gibson presents Pilate as a good man. And he says, there's no evidence Pilate said this or said that, like the things you were just saying. And, Gibson said in interviews afterwards, he said, well, Pilate was a bad man. And he says, I clearly showed that Pilate was responsible. And he says, and he keeps adding in sadomasochism. In this interview, Hitchens keeps mentioning sadomasochism. And he actually says the phrase in the less attractive meaning of that word. So basically saying that, there's an attractive meaning to sadomasochism, but it's not in a Catholic film. And this is the same guy. He didn't die for another few years. He was alive for a while after this. He would have seen all those images of Iraqis naked, being brutally tortured, of Saddam Hussein being hung and all these sort of things. That's genuine sadomasochism that he played a part in. And then he actually mentions, Christopher Hitchens. And then he actually mentions then that Pope John Paul had gone to visit Bashar Assad only a few years before. And Assad said to Pope John Paul, you should come and join with us to fight Israel or something. And apparently Pope John Paul didn't respond. But he wasn't going to jump up in the meeting and say, we're not going to do that, And Gibson, said in a recent enough interview, so when he was talking about the new film, The Resurrection, he said that at the time, he said that the way he was treated, he said, as an artist, as a filmmaker, as a man, as a Christian, and he said, even as an American, my rights were violated and no one cared. And he said that he was actually very angry. He was very angry about how he was treated. And if we think back to it, it really was unique how he was treated. Like, you have the worst people in Hollywood, and even take someone like Harvey Weinstein, it wasn't hated as much as Mel Gibson was after that film. And really a lot of it was just for Christ. It was the fact that he had shown Christ in such a powerful manner. And Jim Caviezel, who played Christ in it, he suffered in his own way for his own career. Like, when he was making the film, it actually took 5 weeks to film the crucifixion scene, and it was freezing. And he actually ended up catching pneumonia, and he used to have to wake up at 2 a.m. in order to do the makeup and to keep one eye shut cosmetically. And the other thing was that him and a couple of others were actually struck by lightning during the Sermon of the Mount scene during the film. And so he said, about the film, I was called to this role. He said, God doesn't choose the best, but he chose me. He says, I say to people out there, if you watch the film, go out and publicly and express your faith publicly. And some of the hysteria at the time was incredible, and people were. Do you remember the story where they said that some guy was watching it and he just died from the shock, but it was just happened to be a guy who saw it and died,
Ridiculous. Yeah.
But yeah, but a lot of it really comes back to the fact that the scenes were just so powerful. And like, there was a guy who played, you said the actors were so well cast. The guy who played Judas was an atheist and became a Catholic afterwards. And the guy who, you said about the scene where they were whipping Christ, and I think one of the guys doing it was a Muslim. And as far as I know, he became a Christian after as well. And there was
Really?
a priest on
Interesting.
site. Yeah, there was a priest on site who was kind of working with them all. So it's, as a piece of art and everything, it's very powerful. And a lot of the things that were said about it were really just in bad faith, And I think if people watching it, there are people who probably never seen the film, but if people watch it now, I think they get that real sense of how deep Christ's love was, and they get that real sense of how undignified the treatment of him was. But that was the death of the classical world and its cruelty, and the birth of the Christian world and its beauty. And that's kind of in the last scene when he's resurrected, the beauty of Christ overcoming death.
Yeah. Yeah, technically it was a magnificent film. I didn't find any. I thought it was perfectly cast. Every character in it was really shone really well. Of course, like the star of the show, he was. I mean, Caviezel was excellent. He really was. He just really, you could just tell he was just consumed in the role, and yeah, he really looked the part. Like he's a very striking man to look at, and he was just so engaging every scene. I apart from that, some of the standout characters for me would have been, of course, Mary Magdalene, and Peter. Pontius Pilate his character got quite a bit of screen time. I think the actor who played him was Serbian or something like that. Just looking at the credits, I can't quite remember. Satan was played by a woman. I only discovered that this year when I just stopped to. Yeah, it was Rosalinda something, and of course Rosalinda. I mean, I don't speak any foreign languages, but I know that's a woman's name.
And then there was the weird Satan baby too. You know that scene where.
Yeah, that was very strange. The weird Satan baby came up first in terms of the demons that were attacking Judas. And the Roman centurion who pierced Jesus' side, and he was basically showered with water and then blood. That was very, very, the whole, like that movie could have been kitschy and it could have been mawkishly sentimental, but Mel Gibson did such a great job, and he, like, by all accounts, he is a bit of a lunatic, and he's a perfectionist on site as a director. But you can tell that it's for a good reason. He's a perfectionist, and it showed here.
And and if you take Apocalypto, Braveheart, Hacksaw Ridge, the representations of Christianity in the films he's made they're very pure, they're very powerful. And I think it's a blessing that there is a guy like him out there, and I think these things are just such a rare thing, and I suppose it stands to the argument that it's important for Catholics to be involved in the arts and to be involved in creative pursuits. Some people aren't into the arts or creative things, but they just kind of have to step aside because these things are very powerful. And if people have a talent at these things, they should be encouraged and they should be supported by the church. most people couldn't name, any of the hundreds or thousands of Renaissance artists, but they could name Michelangelo, they could name Leonardo da Vinci, and they were two Catholics, and they could even
Yes.
they couldn't name. You don't have to be into classical music to know who Mozart is. And now some people might Google Mozart and see he was into some sort of weird esoteric Freemasonry before Freemasonry was kind of banned by the church. But I mean, he was very much influenced by the faith, and so were the other great composers. So I think
Beethoven wrote Ode to Joy. Basically, it's a hymn. And Vivaldi, of course, was a priest. I'm not sure how long. I don't think Vivaldi practiced the priesthood very long. I think he got sick or something. But he was a priest. That's an indisputable fact.
Oh, I actually didn't know he was a priest.
Yeah,
or something new. But yeah, I think hopefully
that's a good subject. The arts tends to be dismissed by traditional conservative people simply because it's been taken over by atheists and people who do modern art. Can you really call modern art art? It just seems to be ugly. And this we're not talking about art this episode, but I just wanted to say, kind of reflecting and expounding your point, the arts are important, and simply because most of in the art world that is reinforced with the media, most of the people in it, the most successful ones, are atheist or just antagonistic towards Catholics. There has been very good Christian art down through the ages, and we shouldn't exit that arena just because it's been filled with enemies of Christianity. If anything, we should assert ourselves more to say we have just as much a right to be in this sphere and to make a good art.
Yeah, it's that's the definition. I mean, you hear the more liberal Catholics talk repeatedly about the importance of going to the margins, and some of those same people then be the people who dismiss Gibson and say, "Oh, Gibson's a party animal. Gibson, he's had kids with different women and things like that." And this guy said, "Well, hang on a second. I mean, look at what he's done for the church, but despite all the problems that he's had, and despite the fact that, I mean, imagine if he didn't have, the church there to help him. Imagine just abandoning him to Hollywood and just leaving him there. Same with someone like Mark Wahlberg. And I think the two of them actually have a film coming out soon about a priest that they're working on together. So it's kind of, people have to be encouraged if they are talented in terms of art. And
I kind of laugh when atheists criticize Catholics who fall, who get into bad behavior, and they say, "Oh, see, he's Catholic and he did something. He got drunk, or he's Catholic and he had an affair, or he's Catholic and he punched a guy who insulted his girlfriend or something." We're like, even atheists know that Catholics aren't superhuman. We're all human, and we're all doing our best. And of course, no one is perfect. So it's, whenever I see someone like point the finger at Catholics when they don't exhibit anything less than a godlike behavior, I always find it really humorous. What were the standout scenes in The Passion for you, or any memorable lines or anything like
that? For me, I just thought that when you watch it again and you see the way he brings the character of Jesus to life, that that Jesus was a real person that was surrounded by people, and he had this mystery about him and this warmth about him. My favorite scene is actually where it's this weird scene where his mother walks in and he has a table. He's making a table, and
That's my favorite scene as well.
yeah, and I don't know if this like, so it's a four-legged table, and it's just a very kind of warm scene between him and his mother, and a very normal scene. And I suppose people forget that part of it too, that for most of his time, Christ just worked, and
He
worked with
lived
his
with his
hands.
parents for most of his life, and
Yeah.
worked with his father. And to think like the Son of Man actually made things and he sold them, and it's just an amazing thing to contemplate. And he was, yeah, it was, and Mary was wondering about the table, and it was just an amazing thing to behold. Like, the Son of Man, just basically, truly human and truly divine, I think how he was described. And his mother, who was conceived without sin, and she was without sin her entire life. And she was basically, but she wasn't perfect, and she was asking what the table was, and she was a bit confused. And of course, this is all conjecture. This is not anywhere in the Old Testament. I think it's from some of the writings of that mystic you reference. Anne Emmerich, was that it?
Yeah.
And then, but my favorite part of that entire scene was when Mary said, "Okay, wash your hands," and he does, and then he squirts water in her face in a sort of playful way, and you think, okay, yeah, he was, but is it out of the question that he would have messed with his mother like that? They weren't just going around with halos the whole time, and every word they said was like totally serious or anything. And of course, this is another thing to throw in the faces of people who criticize Mel Gibson for making, if they allege he made something that was hateful or anti-Semitic. Like, Jesus was quoted when in the Last Supper to say, when he said, "Love others as I loved you," and that includes loving your enemies. And that's a very profound statement, and it's a profound sentiment that you only find in Christianity. Christianity requires us to not just love our friends and family, but our acquaintances, and ultimately even our enemies. Like no other faith requires such a sacrifice and such a high standard of yourself.
And certainly it doesn't have the example of Christ in actually doing that. And I think it's kind of fitting. I suppose it's a good point to finish on, which is that I think it's very fitting that the film was hated, because Christ said, know that the world hated me before it hated you. So I think it's a sign of how excellent the film was, that it was loved and hated in such an equal measure. That was the only appropriate way for people to respond to it.
Yeah, it's certainly, I watch it every year now, and I always get something new from it. And every time I see it, it's like I'm not jaded by it, and it's always it moves me quite deeply, and I just get something new from it every time, and it has to be converting people. It must have converted millions so far. Maybe not millions, but certainly a lot of people.
Yeah, and hopefully when the resurrection comes out, it has the same impact.
Yeah. Should we leave it there, so?
Yeah. So, guys,
we could go on like for 2 hours talking about it, because it's such a great movie. But we didn't want to take up people's time too much here.
We want to save up that time for you to actually go watch it.
Exactly.
But yeah, I think. Because when we talked about this, we were like, geez, you could talk about this movie for longer than the movie itself, but maybe this could be a good start to an introduction or of our thoughts on it, and we might actually come back to it at a later time. And our plan is to kind of we decided to start with the most well-known one, but our plan is to talk about Catholic movies, maybe some people haven't heard of, and kind of discuss them from here on in. Once a week or once every 2 weeks.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so thanks, Augustine. I think this was a good conversation. Please subscribe to our channel if you already haven't, and please like this video and share it with people you think might get something from it.
Okay. God bless everyone.